The morning of my wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite at the Meridian Hotel, watching my maid of honor, Sarah, fasten the tiny pearl buttons running down the back of my dress. My hands trembled as I held the bouquet of white peonies and eucalyptus, their sweet fragrance mingling with the scent of hairspray and the faint smell of coffee drifting up from the lobby below. "You look absolutely radiant, Emma," Sarah whispered, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. But I could see the concern etched in her face, the same worry that had been there for weeks. I knew what she was thinking about. We all were. My mother would be arriving soon. Not as the mother of the bride, not in a flowing dress with a corsage pinned to her lapel, not to walk me down the aisle alongside my stepfather who had raised me. She would arrive in a black uniform with a white apron, carrying a tray, wearing a name tag that read, Linda Catering Staff. I had invited my mother to my wedding as a waitress. The decision hadn't come lightly, and it certainly hadn't come without tears, sleepless nights, and heated arguments with David, my soon-to-be husband. But as I stared at my reflection, I knew it was the only way I could have her there, while still protecting the most important day of my life. To understand why, you'd have to know Linda Crawford, my mother, master manipulator, and the woman who had spent 32 years teaching me that love came with conditions, that boundaries were suggestions, and that my achievements were somehow always about her. Growing up in Chicago, our small apartment on the South Side always felt too cramped for my mother's enormous personality. Linda was beautiful in that dangerous way, all curves and red lipstick and a laugh that could fill a room. She worked as a secretary at a law firm, but she carried herself like she owned the place. People were drawn to her magnetic energy, at least at first. I learned early that my role was to be her perfect little reflection. At 5, she had me in pageants, my hair teased into impossible heights, my face painted with makeup that made me look like a miniature adult. "Smile, Emma," she'd hiss from the audience. "Winners always smile." When I won, she'd parade me around, introducing me to strangers as my little beauty queen. When I lost, she'd spend the car ride home dissecting every flaw, my posture, my dress, my smile, my very existence. "If you had just tried harder," became her favorite refrain. School became my sanctuary. I threw myself into books, into learning, into anything that might earn approval that felt genuine. When I brought home straight A's, she'd glance at my report card and say, "Well, of course, you're my daughter." When I struggled with math in 7th grade and brought home a B, she grounded me for a month and told me I was getting lazy, just like your father. My father had left when I was 4. I barely remembered him, just flashes of a man with kind eyes who used to read me bedtime stories. Linda's version was that he couldn't handle responsibility and ran off with some tramp from his office. I wouldn't learn until I was 23 that he'd actually fought for custody, that he'd called and written letters for years, all of which my mother had hidden from me. The worst part wasn't the lies, though. It was the way she made everything about her. When I broke my arm falling off my bike at age 9, she spent the entire emergency room visit crying about how this would affect her, how she couldn't handle the stress, how I needed to be more careful because she couldn't take any more drama. I sat there with my arm bent at an impossible angle, comforting her. High school brought boyfriends, and with them, a new level of interference. Linda would flirt with them when they came to pick me up, touching their arms and laughing at their jokes, making comments about how they were such handsome young men. More than once, I found her going through my diary, reading my private thoughts about first kisses and teenage heartbreak. "I'm just concerned about you," she'd say when I confronted her. "You're so naive, Emma. The world is full of people who will take advantage of you. I'm the only one looking out for you." When I was accepted to Northwestern on a partial scholarship, I thought she'd be proud. Instead, she cried for 3 days about how I was abandoning her, how ungrateful I was, how she'd sacrificed everything for me, and this was how I repaid her. "You can go to UIC and live at home," she declared. "There's no reason to waste money on dorms when you have a perfectly good room here." I went to Northwestern anyway. It was the first real boundary I'd ever set, and she made me pay for it with guilt trips and dramatic phone calls where she sobbed about being all alone. Northwestern was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my mother, who saw me as just Emma, not Linda's daughter. I threw myself into journalism classes, wrote for the campus newspaper, and slowly began to develop my own voice. But Linda's influence followed me like a shadow. She'd show up unannounced at my dorm, claiming she just happened to be in the area. She'd call my roommate when I didn't answer my phone immediately, spinning elaborate stories about emergencies that never existed. She somehow got the contact information for my professors and would call them to check on my progress, embarrassing me beyond words. The summer before my junior year, I interned at the Chicago Tribune. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, and I was thriving. My editor, Janet, was everything my mother wasn't: supportive but not smothering, proud of my work but not possessive of my success. One day, Linda showed up at the Tribune offices. She'd dressed up, hair perfectly styled, wearing her best suit, and asked to speak with Janet. I watched in horror from across the newsroom as she introduced herself and began what I knew would be a performance. Later, Janet pulled me aside. "Your mother is very involved," she said carefully. "She wanted to know about your work, your schedule, whether you were applying yourself properly. She also suggested that your byline should read, 'Emma Crawford, daughter of Linda Crawford,' because," and I quote, "people should know where her talent comes from." That night, I called my mother, shaking with rage and embarrassment. "You can't keep doing this," I told her. "This is my career, my life." "I was just being supportive," she said, her voice taking on that wounded tone I knew so well. "I'm proud of you, Emma. I want people to know you're my daughter." "But it's not about you," I said, the words feeling revolutionary as they left my mouth. "This is about me, my work, my achievements." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold as winter. "After everything I've done for you, after all my sacrifices, this is how you talk to your mother." I spent my senior year trying to establish more boundaries. I stopped answering every call immediately. I didn't tell her about job interviews or dates. I started therapy through the campus counseling center, where I learned words like enmeshment and emotional manipulation, and began to understand that what I'd grown up thinking was love was actually something much more complicated and damaging. I met David Chen at a coffee shop near campus during my last semester. I was working on my senior thesis about local government corruption, surrounded by papers and empty espresso cups, when this guy with warm brown eyes and the most genuine smile I'd ever seen asked if he could share my table. He was finishing his MBA at Kellogg, and something about his calm presence made me feel settled in a way I'd never experienced. We talked for hours about everything and nothing: books, travel dreams, the way the light hit the lake on winter mornings. David was from a big, loud, loving family in San Francisco. His parents had immigrated from Taiwan when he was 5, and they ran a small restaurant in Chinatown. When he talked about them, his whole face lit up. He told stories about family dinners that lasted for hours, about siblings who teased each other mercilessly but would drop everything to help, about parents who worked 18-hour days but never missed a school play or soccer game. It was alien to me, this idea of family as a source of joy rather than anxiety. I didn't tell him much about my mother at first. When he asked about my family, I'd give vague answers. "It's complicated," or "we're not that close." He didn't push, which I appreciated, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. 3 months into dating, Linda decided she needed to meet him. She called me 17 times in one day until I finally answered. "You can't keep this boy a secret forever, Emma," she said. "What will he think of you if you're too ashamed to introduce him to your family?" That was her particular genius, taking my reasonable boundaries and twisting them into evidence of my failure as a daughter, as a person. Against David's gentle protests, "Maybe we should wait a bit longer," I arranged dinner at a neutral restaurant downtown. I spent the entire day before in a state of near panic, trying to coach David on how to interact with her. "Just be polite but not too friendly," I told him as we walked to the restaurant. "Don't laugh too hard at her jokes. Don't tell her personal things about yourself. And whatever you do, don't mention your family too much. She'll get jealous." David stopped walking and turned to face me. "Emma, she's your mother. Why are you so afraid of her?" I didn't have an answer for that, not one that made sense to someone who'd grown up with normal parents. The dinner was a masterclass in Linda's particular brand of performance. She arrived 20 minutes late, making a grand entrance in a red dress that was slightly too tight, slightly too young for her 52 years. She air-kissed me like we were acquaintances at a cocktail party, then turned her full attention to David. "So you're the mysterious boyfriend," she purred, settling into her chair and immediately commandeering the conversation. "Emma has been so secretive about you. I was beginning to think you didn't exist." For the next 2 hours, she flirted, interrogated, and performed. She told embarrassing stories about my childhood, peppered David with questions about his family's restaurant, how quaint, and made subtle digs about my appearance and personality. "Emma's always been so serious," she said, laughing as she cut into her steak. Even as a little girl, she couldn't just relax and have fun. Always reading, always worrying about something. David, to his credit, tried to steer the conversation back to me in positive ways. "I love how thoughtful Emma is," he'd say, or "she's one of the smartest people I know." But Linda had a way of deflecting compliments about me and turning them back to herself. "Oh, she gets that from me. I was always the smart one in my family, too." By the end of the night, I felt hollowed out, like she'd somehow managed to absorb all the oxygen in the room. David was polite but quiet as we waited for our taxi. "So," he said carefully as we rode back to his apartment, "that was intense." I started crying before I could stop myself. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "I know she's a lot. I tried to warn you." David pulled me against his chest, and I could smell his familiar scent, soap and coffee and something uniquely him that always made me feel safe. "Hey," he said softly, "you don't have to apologize for her, but Emma, the way she talked to you, talked about you, that's not okay." That night, curled up in David's arms, I told him everything. About the pageants and the emotional manipulation, about the way she'd sabotaged my relationships and invaded my privacy, about how exhausted I was from always walking on eggshells, always managing her emotions instead of my own. "She says she loves me," I whispered into the darkness, "but it doesn't feel like love. It feels like ownership." David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Love shouldn't make you feel scared." After graduation, I got a job at a small magazine in Chicago, and David and I moved in together. For the first time in my life, I had a home that felt peaceful. We cooked dinner together, watched bad movies on Sunday mornings, and talked about everything from politics to our dreams of traveling to Southeast Asia. But Linda's presence loomed over everything like storm clouds. She'd call during dinner, and I'd spend the rest of the evening agitated and snappy. She'd show up uninvited at our apartment, bringing criticism disguised as gifts, workout DVDs, "because you look like you've gained weight, honey," or self-help books about being more grateful to the people who love you. David suggested couples therapy, which led to individual therapy, which probably saved my sanity. Dr. Reynolds was a soft-spoken woman in her 60s who had a way of asking questions that made me really examine my assumptions about what was normal. "Tell me about boundaries in your relationship with your mother," she said during one of our early sessions. I stared at her blankly. "Boundaries. Limits on what you're willing to accept. Rules about how you want to be treated." It was revolutionary to think that I could have rules about how my own mother treated me. Slowly, I began to experiment with setting small boundaries. I stopped answering every call immediately. I started saying no to some of her demands for my time. I refused to let her have a key to our apartment. Each boundary was met with escalation. When I didn't call her back within an hour, she'd call David's phone or show up at my office or claim she was having a medical emergency. When I told her she couldn't just drop by unannounced, she accused me of being cold and ungrateful and cried about how much she missed me. "This is what's called an extinction burst," Dr. Reynolds explained. When you start enforcing boundaries with someone who's used to controlling you, they often escalate their behavior before they accept the new limits. The problem was, Linda never seemed to accept the new limits. She just found more creative ways around them. David proposed on a rainy Thursday evening in April. We were making pasta in our little kitchen, and he suddenly got down on one knee right there between the stove and the refrigerator, holding a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Emma Martinez," he said, using the name I'd started going by professionally to create some distance from my mother. "Will you marry me and let me love you exactly as you are for the rest of our lives?" I said yes through happy tears, and we called his parents immediately. The joy in their voices as they welcomed me to the family made my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. I waited 2 days before calling my mother. "Finally!" she shrieked when I told her the news. I was wondering when that boy would get around to proposing. "Let me see the ring. I'm coming over right now." "Mom, you can't just—" "Of course I can. This is the most important moment of your life. I need to be there." She hung up before I could protest, and an hour later she was at our door with a bottle of cheap champagne and an armload of bridal magazines. "Now," she said, settling onto our couch like she lived there, "we need to start planning immediately. A spring wedding would be lovely. We could do it at St. Mark's. That's where I always pictured you getting married. I know a florist who owes me a favor, and my friend Sandra's daughter used the most wonderful caterer." David and I exchanged glances. "Actually," I said carefully, "we were thinking of a small ceremony, maybe just family and close friends." Linda's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, hurt, and then determination. "Nonsense. You only get married once, Emma. This is our chance to show everyone how successful you've become, how proud I am of you." There it was, our chance. How proud I am. The next few months were a constant battle. Linda had opinions about everything: the venue, too modern; the dress, too simple; the guest list, too small; the menu, too ethnic, referring to David's request for some Asian fusion options. She inserted herself into every decision, often going behind our backs to contact vendors directly. When we chose the Meridian Hotel for the reception, she called them pretending to be me and tried to change the menu. When I picked a simple, elegant dress from a local boutique, she showed up there the next day claiming to be my wedding planner and tried to steer the staff toward more elaborate options. "I'm just trying to help," she'd say when I confronted her about these incidents. "You're so busy with work, and planning a wedding is overwhelming. I have experience with these things." "What experience?" I asked. "You've never planned a wedding." "I planned my own wedding," she said with wounded dignity. Her wedding to my father had been a courthouse ceremony followed by dinner at Denny's. I knew because I'd found the photos. The breaking point came in January, 4 months before the wedding. David and I had spent hours crafting our guest list, carefully balancing his large extended family with my small circle of close friends and colleagues. It was going to be about 80 people, intimate but not tiny, festive but not overwhelming. I came home from work one day to find Linda in our living room with her laptop open, surrounded by papers. "I've been working on the guest list," she announced cheerfully. "You forgot so many people, Emma. My book club, the ladies from work, Cousin Janet and her whole family. You remember Cousin Janet, don't you? And of course all my neighbors. The Petersons would be so hurt if they weren't invited. And Mrs. Chen from downstairs has been asking about the wedding for months." I picked up her revised list. She'd added 67 people. Most of them I hadn't spoken to in years, if I knew them at all. "Mom, no," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is our wedding. David and I decide who gets invited. But these people are family, Emma. They're part of your life." "No, they're part of your life. And that's not the same thing." Her face crumpled in that familiar way that used to send me running to comfort her. "I just want to share this happy moment with people who care about you." "But they don't care about me," I said, and for the first time, I didn't move to soothe her tears. "They care about you, and this isn't about you." The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's tears stopped as abruptly as they'd started, and her expression shifted to something I'd seen before but never acknowledged: cold, calculating anger. "Fine," she said, snapping her laptop shut. "Have your little wedding, but don't come crying to me when you realize how selfish you've been." She gathered her papers and left without another word. David found me sitting on the floor of our living room an hour later, staring at the space where she'd been. "I think," I said slowly, "I need to uninvite my mother from my wedding." The idea of excluding my mother from my wedding felt both impossible and inevitable. Dr. Reynolds helped me work through the guilt and fear that came with even considering it. "What are you most afraid of if she's there?" she asked during one particularly difficult session in February. I closed my eyes and pictured my wedding day with Linda in attendance. "She'll make it about her," I said. "She'll find a way to be the center of attention. She'll embarrass me in front of David's family. She'll cause drama. She'll ruin the most important day of my life, just like she's ruined everything else." "And what are you most afraid of if she's not there?" That I'm a terrible daughter, that everyone will think I'm cold and ungrateful, that maybe she's right and I am selfish. Dr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. Those are the voices of guilt and obligation speaking. But what does your intuition tell you? What would feel right? I thought about the kind of wedding I actually wanted, joyful, peaceful, focused on love rather than performance. I thought about David's family, warm and genuine, and how they'd react to Linda's particular brand of chaos. I thought about our friends, people who'd supported us and celebrated our relationship, having to navigate the minefield of my mother's emotional neediness. I want her there, I said finally, but I want the version of her that exists in my head, the mother I wish I had, not the one I actually have. And is there a way to have both? To include her while protecting your boundaries? That's when the idea first began to form. It was David who suggested it, actually, during one of our long conversations about the situation. What if there was a way for her to be there, but in a role where she couldn't disrupt things? He said one evening as we walked along Lake Michigan, the February wind whipping off the water, where she'd have to follow someone else's lead instead of trying to take over. I thought about it for days. The plan that emerged was controversial, to say the least. Sarah thought I was being cruel. My stepfather, who'd married my mother when I was 12 and had watched her behavior with growing concern over the years, understood but worried about the fallout. But the more I considered it, the more it felt like the only solution that honored both my need for boundaries and my complicated love for the woman who raised me. I would invite my mother to my wedding. As a member of the catering staff, I spent weeks crafting the conversation. How do you tell your mother that she's invited to your wedding, but not as your mother? How do you explain that you love her, but don't trust her enough to let her be a guest at the most important day of your life? I decided to approach it as a business proposition. Linda had always prided herself on her organizational skills, her ability to make things happen. She'd worked in service industry jobs before her secretary position, and she knew how events ran from behind the scenes. I called her on a Tuesday evening in March, 2 months before the wedding. We hadn't spoken since the guest list incident, and her voice was chilly when she answered. I wondered if I'd hear from you before the wedding, she said. Mom, I want to talk to you about the wedding. If you're calling to apologize, I accept. We can still make this work if we move quickly. No, that's not. I'm calling to invite you. A pause. Of course you're inviting me. I'm your mother. I'm inviting you to be part of the catering staff. The silence stretched so long I checked my phone to make sure the call hadn't dropped. I'm sorry, what did you just say? I took a deep breath and launched into the explanation I'd rehearsed. The catering company we hired is always looking for extra staff for large events. You'd be paid for the day, you'd get to see everything that happens, you'd be there for the whole celebration, but you'd be working, which means you'd have clear responsibilities and someone else would be managing the logistics. You want me to serve drinks at your wedding. I want you to be there, I said. This is the only way I can handle having you there, without worrying that something will go wrong. Another long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was dangerously quiet. Do you understand what you're asking me to do? Do you understand how humiliating this is? I understand that it's unconventional. But Mom, we both know what happens when you're at events like this. You take over, you make everything about you, you stress me out to the point where I can't enjoy anything. This way, you get to be there, but within boundaries. Boundaries. She spat the word like it tasted bad. You and your boundaries. I raised you, Emma. I sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay me? By making me a servant at your own wedding? You're not a servant, I'm your mother. I should be walking you down the aisle. I should be in the front row crying happy tears. I should be giving a toast about how proud I am of the woman you've become. Instead, you want me to wear a uniform and serve your husband's family like I'm the help. I could hear her starting to cry, but this time, the sound didn't automatically trigger my guilt response. Months of therapy had taught me to recognize the difference between genuine hurt and manipulative performance. I want you to be there, I repeated. This is the only way that can happen. Then I won't be there at all, she said. If you're going to treat me like this, if you have so little respect for me, then maybe it's better if I just don't come. It was a classic Linda move. The dramatic ultimatum designed to make me backtrack and apologize and beg her to reconsider on her terms. "I hope you change your mind," I said instead. "If you decide you want to be there, I'll email you the catering company's contact information. The pay is $18 an hour, and you need to be there at 10 a.m. for setup." I hung up before she could respond. The next month passed in relative peace. Linda didn't call, which was both a relief and a source of anxiety. I'd grown so accustomed to managing her emotional crises that her silence felt ominous. David's family arrived from San Francisco 3 days before the wedding, filling our small apartment with laughter and the smell of the Chinese pastries his mother had insisted on bringing. His parents, Helen and Robert, embraced me with the kind of unconditional warmth I'd always imagined normal families provided. "We're so happy David found you," Helen said, holding my hands as we sat at our kitchen table. "He's been different since he met you. Calmer, more himself." His sister Amy, 2 years younger and 5 inches taller, appointed herself my surrogate sister. "I'm going to take such good care of you this weekend," she declared. "David made me promise to keep you from getting stressed out." If only it were that simple. 2 days before the wedding, I was at the hotel with Sarah and Amy, finalizing details with the catering manager, when my phone rang. Linda's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Emma." Her voice was strained, like she'd been crying. "I need to know if the offer still stands." "What offer?" "The job at your wedding." I felt Amy's eyes on me, curious and concerned. "Yes," I said carefully. "It still stands. I'll do it." The words came out in a rush, like she'd had to force them. "I'll work your wedding, but I want you to know that this is the most hurtful thing you've ever done to me." "I know you feel that way." "I don't feel that way, Emma. It is that way. But I love you enough to swallow my pride and be there for you, even if you don't want me there as your mother." The manipulation was so classic, so perfectly crafted to make me feel guilty while making her look like the martyr, that I almost laughed. "I'll email you the details," I said. That evening, David found me sitting on our fire escape, staring out at the city lights. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, settling beside me. "Every hour of every day," I admitted. "What if this backfires? What if she shows up drunk, or causes a scene, or just refuses to do the job?" "Then we'll handle it," he said simply. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it together." I leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, trying to absorb some of his calm confidence. "Your parents must think I'm insane," I said. "My parents think you're brave for setting boundaries with someone who's been controlling you your whole life. My mom said she wishes she'd learned to do that with her own mother years ago." I thought about Helen, so kind and gentle, and tried to imagine her having a mother like Linda. "Really? Really? And Amy thinks you're a badass for finding such a creative solution." Despite everything, I smiled. "A badass?" Her exact words were, "That's some next-level boundary-setting shit right there, but I cleaned it up for your delicate ears." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city breathe around us. Tomorrow night, we'd be married. Despite all the drama, despite all my mother's attempts to sabotage or control the day, we were actually going to pull this off. "I love you," I told David, the words feeling like both a promise and a prayer. "I love you too," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be perfect." I woke up at 6 a.m. in the bridal suite at the Meridian, my stomach churning with anxiety and excitement. Sarah was already awake, sitting by the window with coffee and her phone. "The weather's perfect," she announced. 75 degrees, sunny, light breeze. It's like you ordered it from a catalog. The morning passed in a blur of hair and makeup, photographs, and the constant stream of wedding vendors confirming details. My dress hung on the bathroom door like a promise, all silk and lace and possibility. At 10:30, Helen knocked on the door. "There's someone here who wants to see you," she said, her expression carefully neutral. My mother stood in the hallway wearing the black slacks and white button-down shirt that the catering company required, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the uniform and the artificial fluorescent lighting. "Hi, baby," she said softly. "Hi, Mom." We stared at each other for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. You look beautiful, she said finally. Thank you. I just wanted to tell you, I'm proud of you, even if I'm angry about this situation. I'm proud of the woman you've become. It was the closest thing to genuine sentiment I'd heard from her in years, and it caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw a flash of the mother I'd always wanted her to be. Thank you, I said again, because I didn't trust myself to say more. I should go, she said. They want us downstairs for orientation. She turned to leave, then paused. Emma? Yeah? I do love you. I know you don't always believe that, but I do. After she left, I sat down hard on the nearest chair, shaking. You okay? Sarah asked, rubbing my shoulders. I don't know, I admitted. That was almost normal. Maybe this will actually work, Amy said hopefully. At 2:00, I walked down the aisle of the hotel's garden courtyard on my stepfather's arm, the sun warm on my face, and David waiting for me at the altar with tears in his eyes. The ceremony was everything I'd dreamed of, intimate, heartfelt, focused on love rather than spectacle. During the exchange of vows, I caught a glimpse of my mother in the background, refilling water glasses at the tables. She was smiling, and for a moment it looked genuine. The reception was held in the hotel's ballroom, all cream and gold and fairy lights. David's family had flown in cousins and aunts and uncles, and the room buzzed with conversation in English, Mandarin, and what sounded like a combination of both. For the first hour, everything went smoothly. The food was delicious, the music was perfect, and I actually began to relax. My mother moved efficiently between tables, professional and unobtrusive. A few guests who knew our family situation shot me curious glances, but no one said anything. Then came the toasts. David's father spoke about love and partnership, about how proud they were to welcome me into their family. Sarah told stories about our friendship, about how happy David made me. My stepfather gave a brief, sweet speech about watching me grow into a strong, independent woman. The MC asked if anyone else wanted to say a few words. I saw my mother moving toward the microphone before anyone else did. No, I whispered, but she was already taking it from the stand. Hi, everyone, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. I'm Linda, Emma's mother. The room fell silent. David reached for my hand under the table, squeezing tight. I know some of you might be surprised to see me working tonight instead of sitting with the family, Linda continued, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of something that made my chest tight. But I wanted to be here for my daughter's special day, no matter what role I had to play. Oh God, she was going to do this. She was going to make herself the center of attention, the martyr, the wronged mother who sacrificed her dignity for love. Emma is an extraordinary woman, she went on, strong-willed, independent, sometimes to a fault. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room. She's always known exactly what she wants and exactly how to get it. Even when she was a little girl, she had this determination. I closed my eyes, waiting for the emotional manipulation, the public humiliation disguised as maternal love. And what she wants, Linda said, her voice catching slightly, is boundaries, respect for her choices, the space to build her own life without interference. I opened my eyes, staring at her in shock. It took me a long time to understand that, she continued. Too long. I thought love meant being involved in every decision, having a say in every choice. I thought that because I gave her life, I had a right to direct how she lived it. The room was completely silent now. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. But watching her today, seeing how happy she is, how peaceful she looks, I realized that the greatest gift I can give my daughter is not my involvement in her life, but my respect for the life she's chosen to build. Tears were running down my face now, and I couldn't tell if they were from relief, shock, or something else entirely. So here's to Emma and David, Linda said, raising an empty champagne glass someone had left on a nearby table. May you always have the courage to ask for what you need, and may the people who love you have the wisdom to listen. She set down the glass and walked back toward the kitchen without another word. The room erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was staring at the spot where my mother had been standing, trying to process what had just happened. David leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Did your mom just apologize?" "I think so," I whispered back, wiping tears from my cheeks. "I think she actually did." The rest of the reception passed in a haze of dancing and laughter. David's cousins taught me card games I'd never heard of. His grandmother pressed wrapped red envelopes into my hands, and I found myself laughing until my sides hurt at stories about David's childhood adventures. Every so often, I'd catch sight of my mother clearing plates or refilling coffee, and each time she'd give me a small smile that looked different somehow. Not performative or manipulative, just genuine. Near the end of the evening, as guests were starting to leave and the band was packing up their equipment, Linda approached our table. She'd changed out of her uniform and back into street clothes. "I'm heading out," she said quietly. "Thank you for letting me be here." I stood up, my wedding dress rustling around me. "Mom, you don't have to say anything," she said quickly. "I meant what I said up there, about boundaries and respect. I have a lot to think about." She hugged me then, briefly but tightly. "I'm proud of you, Emma. And I'm sorry it took me so long to show you that in a way you could actually feel." After she left, David and I sat alone at our table, surrounded by the detritus of celebration. Wilted flowers, empty glasses, crumpled napkins that looked like fallen snow in the dim lighting. "How are you feeling?" he asked. I considered the question seriously. Confused, relieved, sad, happy. All of it. That sounds about right for dealing with family, or... We sat in comfortable silence for a while, my head on his shoulder, his hand tracing patterns on my back. "Do you think she meant it?" I asked finally. What she said about boundaries and respect. David was quiet for a moment. "I think she meant it when she said it. Whether she can actually follow through, that remains to be seen." My mother and I didn't speak for 2 weeks after the wedding. When she finally called, it was to ask if I wanted to have coffee. Not dinner, not a long visit, just coffee. We met at a neutral cafe downtown, both of us nervous and careful with our words. "I've been seeing someone," she said after we'd ordered. "A therapist." I nearly choked on my latte. "Really?" "Really. Dr. Patricia Wu. She specializes in..." Linda paused, looking uncomfortable. "Family relationships, boundary issues." It was the first time I'd ever heard my mother acknowledge that our relationship had issues, let alone that she might need professional help to address them. "How's that going?" I asked carefully. "Hard," she admitted. "Really hard." She asked me questions that make me look at things I've never wanted to look at. Over the following months, our relationship began to shift in small, incremental ways. Linda started calling before visiting instead of just showing up. She asked about my life without immediately turning the conversation back to herself. When I told her I didn't want her advice about something, she actually listened instead of steamrolling over my boundaries. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks and moments when she slipped back into old patterns. But for the first time in my life, I could see her actually trying to change. The breakthrough came during a therapy session Dr. Reynolds had suggested, a joint session with both my mother and me. "I need you to understand something," Linda said, looking directly at me for what felt like the first time in years. "The way I raised you, the way I treated you. It wasn't about you not being good enough. It was about me being terrified that you were too good, that you'd realize you didn't need me and leave." "But that's exactly what it made me want to do," I said. "Leave." "I know that now." Her voice was quiet, smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Dr. Wu helped me see that by trying so hard to keep you close, I was pushing you away. By trying to control you, I was losing you. You weren't losing me, Mom, but you were losing the chance to actually know me." We both cried during that session. Not the manipulative tears I was used to from her, but real, messy, complicated grief for all the years we'd wasted fighting instead of understanding each other. David and I bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in Oak Park, close enough to the city for my work, but far enough out to have a real yard and neighbors who wave when you walk by. My mother comes for dinner once a month. She brings flowers, helps with the dishes, and leaves at a reasonable hour without drama. She's learned to ask about David's work and actually listen to the answers. She's stopped giving unsolicited advice about everything from my hair to my career to our decision to wait before having children. Most remarkably, she started talking about her own life as something separate from mine. She joined a book club, started taking pottery classes, even went on a few dates with a man she met at the community center. "I spent so many years making you my whole world," she told me recently as we worked together in my garden, planting tomatoes and basil. "I forgot that I was supposed to have a world of my own." Last month, David got a promotion that would require us to move to Denver. When I told my mother, I braced myself for the guilt trips and emotional manipulation I'd grown up expecting. Instead, she was quiet for a moment, then smiled. "Colorado's beautiful," she said. "When are you thinking of going?" "You're not upset?" "Of course I'm upset," she said with a laugh that sounded almost normal. "I'll miss you terribly. But Emma, you're a grown woman with your own life to live. My job isn't to keep you here. It's to love you enough to let you go." It was such a simple statement, but it represented a fundamental shift in how she understood motherhood, love, and relationships. Looking back on my wedding day, on the decision to invite my mother as catering staff, I sometimes wonder if I was being cruel. But then I remember the woman who stood at that microphone and publicly acknowledged her mistakes, who found a way to honor my boundaries while still expressing her love. The truth is, traditional family roles weren't working for us. My mother couldn't be trusted to be a normal wedding guest, and I couldn't handle the stress of managing her emotions on the most important day of my life. By giving her a specific job with clear parameters, I found a way for her to be present without being disruptive. More importantly, I think it forced her to see our relationship from a different angle. For the first time, she had to consider my needs as more important than her own. She had to respect my authority instead of challenging it. She had to follow my lead instead of trying to take over. In some ways, working my wedding was the first boundary I'd ever successfully enforced with her. And surprisingly, once she stopped fighting against it, she seemed almost relieved to have clear expectations and a defined role. Dr. Reynolds says that sometimes we have to get creative about how we maintain relationships with people we love, but can't trust in traditional ways. That doesn't mean we're giving up on them. It means we're finding ways to love them that don't require us to sacrifice our own well-being. I still see my mother regularly. Our relationship will probably always be more complicated than I wish it were. She still occasionally slips into old patterns of manipulation or control, and I still have to be vigilant about maintaining boundaries. But something fundamental shifted that day. She put on a catering uniform and served drinks at my wedding. She learned that love sometimes means stepping back instead of stepping in. And I learned that protecting myself doesn't make me a bad daughter. It makes me a person worthy of respect. When people ask me about the wedding, about the controversial decision to have my mother work instead of attend as a guest, I tell them this: sometimes love looks different than we expect it to. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is refuse to enable someone else's harmful behavior, even when that someone is family. My wedding was perfect, not because everything went according to plan, but because for the first time in my life, I prioritized my own needs without apologizing for it. I married the love of my life surrounded by people who supported us, and I managed to include my mother in a way that honored both her desire to be there and my need for peace. 6 months later, when my mother sent me a card for our anniversary, she wrote, "Thank you for teaching me that boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges to better relationships." I think she finally understands what I was trying to tell her all those years. Love without respect isn't really love at all. It's possession, control, neediness disguised as devotion. Real love, the kind David and I have, the kind my mother and I are slowly building, requires seeing the other person as separate from yourself, with their own needs and desires and right to self-determination. It took 32 years and a very unconventional wedding invitation for my mother to learn that lesson. But better late than never. Sometimes I think about the mother I wished I'd had growing up, warm, supportive, present, but not invasive. I realize now that I was asking her to be someone she wasn't capable of being at the time. The mother she is now, imperfect but trying, working on herself, learning to love me in ways I can actually receive, is the mother she was always capable of becoming. She just needed someone to hold her accountable first. My wedding taught me that you can love someone and still refuse to accept unacceptable behavior, You can honor a relationship while insisting on your own dignity. You can be grateful for what someone gave you while still acknowledging what they took away. And sometimes, the most radical act of love is saying no. The boundaries I set that day, with my mother, with myself, with what I was willing to accept in the name of family obligation, have shaped every relationship I've had since. I'm a better wife, a better friend, a better person because I learned to value my own peace as much as other people's comfort. David was right when he said love shouldn't make you feel scared. Real love, healthy love, makes you feel safe to be exactly who you are. That's the kind of love I want to pass on to the children we're planning to have someday. That's the kind of love I'm still learning to have with my mother, one carefully negotiated conversation at a time. And that's the kind of love that made my wedding day, unconventional as it was, absolutely perfect.